Adobe Illustrator is used by artists and graphic designers to create scalable vector artwork for use in projects for both print and web. Artists use Illustrator for creating clean visual compositions that can be scaled infinitely without losing quality, creating freehand drawings and illustrations, tracing and recoloring scanned-in artwork, and also creating wireframes from which to create digital paintings. Designers use Illustrator for creating logos, icons, and other complex shapes, setting type for use in flyers, magazines, and business cards, and creating website mockups and graphics for use across multiple screens. Illustrator isn't just limited to artists and designers, though. Many people use Illustrator for their projects, and it allows them to create visually compelling and flexible artwork like this. Illustrator also integrates with other Adobe applications like InDesign for print production and digital magazines, Photoshop for use with smart filters, Flash for web animations and games, or Adobe After Effects and Premiere for use in title sequences and video animation. Whether you're a graphic designer or an artist, Adobe Illustrator offers you a flexible way to deploy your creative vision to virtually any screen or substrate.
As a new Illustrator user, one of the things that you have to be able to do is create a new document. Now, the process is fairly straightforward, but with that being said, there is a dialog box that I'd like to take a look at in greater detail so you're completely comfortable with the process. What you need to do is come up to the File menu, and from there you can choose New. Command-N or Control-N on the Windows side would be the keyboard shortcut. Once you select that command, it's going to open up the New Document dialog box. Now, the first thing that you can do is you can name this document. Now, you don't have to do it here. You'll always have the opportunity to name the file once you go to save it. But if you do want to name it right out of the gate, you can do that here. The next thing that you can do is choose a profile, and the profile is a great starting point for your document. If you go ahead and click on the Profile menu, you'll notice that there's several different profiles that are available inside of Illustrator. We have print, web, devices, so on and so forth. So depending upon your project, what you would do is select the profile that best suits your needs. So in this case, if you're going to go to print with this document, you would choose print. And when you do that, you'll notice that all of these options are pre-populated with values. You can always come in and make modifications to these values. You can increase the number of artboards. In this case, we're going to leave it set to 1 as we probably don't even know what artboards are yet as we're new users to Illustrator. But once you work with Illustrator more and more, and you become familiar with what artboards are, if you want more than one, you can add that value here, and then there's some options for controlling the layout of those artboards. You'll notice right now in the size drop-down menu, it's set to letter, which is a fairly common size here in the United States, but notice that there's several other sizes available, legal and other international options that are fairly common. So in this case, if I leave it set to letter, you'll notice that the width and the height are pre-populated with the appropriate letter dimensions. Now right now, the width and height is coming through in points. You may not be comfortable working in points or understanding what points are, so you can change the unit of measurement by accessing this menu and choosing something that you are more familiar with, like inches. And you'll notice it is in fact 8.5 by 11 inches. With that being said, though, you don't have to come over and change the unit of measurement simply because you're not comfortable with what's being presented. For example, if it is set to points and you know that the document has to be 6 inches wide, you don't have to change the unit of measurement to come in here and type in 6 inches. Simply type it in, and when you tab away from the field, Illustrator will do the hard work and calculate the width in its current unit of measurement, which is points in this case. So Illustrator is intelligent enough to work with really any unit of measurement. Anytime you make a modification to one of these options, you'll notice that the profile changes to custom because you've customized the profile. You can also change the orientation, which is really just flipping the width and height values for you, but it's a nice, convenient way to do that. If you're working with a print document and you're going to send it to a print shop, you may want your content to bleed to the edge of the document, and you have some bleed options here. Again, bleed options do nothing more but allow you to print content right to the edge of the page. Ultimately, you'll be printing a little bit off the page because the printer will cut it, but that opens up a can of worms for a much longer discussion. Finally, there's also some advanced options. Because we're working with a print profile, the color mode is set to CMYK, and the raster effects is set to a higher resolution. If you were to come over and choose an on-screen profile like web, you'll notice it changes to RGB and the raster effects resolution goes down. So the new document dialog box is fairly straightforward. It's pretty easy to come in here and customize a document's dimensions to best suit the needs of your particular project. Once you're happy with the settings, all you have to do is click OK, and the new document will be created. Within this one document, I have this company's complete business stationery. I have their letterhead, their envelope, and their business card. But each of those elements reside within their own artboard. So after you create a new document, how do you work with artboards? You have a couple different options here inside of Illustrator. One thing that you can do is come over to the Artboards panel. Now, if you don't see the Artboards panel over here, you can always come up to the Window menu, and under the Window menu, you can choose Artboards. But here, we can see a list of all of the artboards. And if we want to change the order of this list, we have that option. We can simply click and drag to change the order of these artboards, or we can use these arrows to change the order of the artboards. In this case, it doesn't really make a huge difference if we're working with different orders for these artboards. But you also have the ability to create a new artboard from this panel, or remove or delete an artboard from this document. Now, we can also zoom in to a particular artboard, and that can be helpful. Let me just show you the size of the canvas inside of Illustrator. As I zoom out, you'll begin to see a lighter gray space. This darker gray space represents the canvas. You could have an artboard anywhere within this canvas. So this can be a great navigational tool if you have a lot of different artboards, and the artboards are different sizes, and you're zoomed into different artboards at different points in time. For example, what if I really want to see the business card artboard? Well, what you need to do is click on the business card artboard here within the Artboards panel, then click it again, and then you'll zoom directly to that artboard. So this can be a great navigational tool. And it can also be a management tool. Like I said, you can remove and add artboards from this panel as well. But if you want to start managing artboards, it's really my preference to use the Artboard tool. I'm going to go ahead and double-click the Zoom tool to bring this document back to 100%. Then I'm going to come over and choose the Artboard tool. Now, when you do that, you'll notice in this case, the business card artboard is selected. You have the ability to remove it by clicking this little X. You can also resize it by grabbing any one of these resize handles. Now, you can easily select another artboard by either using the Artboards panel or by clicking on a different artboard, and you'll notice it becomes active. But what if you want precise control over that artboard? Maybe you want to change the dimensions by 1/2 inch. Well, if that's the case, you can come up here towards the top and click this button to open up the artboard options. And here you can change the width and the height numerically. You can even change the orientation. So you do have precise control over these artboards. Additionally, if you have the Artboard tool selected and you move outside an existing artboard, you'll get a different icon. This icon means that if you click and drag, you'll create a new artboard. And remember, if you want to remove it, you can click this little X here, or you can click the trash can here in the Artboards panel. So as you can see, artboards really give you a way to organize your content and separate your content out into different sections, all the while staying within one single document. As a new user of Adobe Illustrator, you may be somewhat intimidated when it comes to creating artwork. You may not feel comfortable using a drawing tablet or working with the pen tool. But fear not, one of the easiest ways to create artwork is using some of the basic shape tools. In fact, some of the most complicated pieces of artwork created in Illustrator start off by using these tools. So it is very important to be comfortable with them. And fortunately, like I said, they're simple to use. Over here in the Tools panel, you'll find the Rectangle tool. But if you click and hold down, you'll find some hidden tools. Not only do you have a Rectangle tool, but you have a Rounded Rectangle tool, which gives you the ability to create rounded corners for that rectangle. There's also the Ellipse tool, a Polygon tool, and the Star tool. If you feel like you're going to be working with these tools pretty extensively, you can come over and select this option to the far right, this little arrow. When you let go of the mouse with your cursor on top of this bar to the right, you create a tear-off, which is essentially a mini panel to access these tools. Now, most of these tools work very much in the same way. So right now I have the rectangle tool selected. The rectangle tool has a fill color associated with it and a stroke color, and then you'll see that there's a series of stroke attributes. Now, you can set the fill and stroke color in multiple places within the interface, but right now we're just going to take a look at working with these options here in the control bar. So we have a fill color and the stroke color. If you want to change them, simply click on this little arrow to open up the swatches panel and pick a swatch. In this case, I'll go with this RGB cyan. Once you select it, you'll notice that that swatch is updated. Now, to get rid of this panel, you can press Return or Enter on your keyboard. And right now I have a black stroke color. If you don't want a stroke, you don't need to use one. You can always come over and choose None. The same is true with a fill. Sometimes you want to create a shape that has an outline color but not a fill color. So it's completely up to you in terms of how you work with these colors. But once you're happy with the colors that you set here, in order for you to create a shape, all you have to do is click and drag. That's all there is to it. Now, in the case of the rectangle tool, if you hold down the Shift key, you'll constrain the width and the height. So basically, you're creating a square. Otherwise, if you don't do that, you're at liberty to create any type of rectangle. Now, once you create the shape, you can modify it. Simply press the V key on the keyboard to activate the selection tool. And at that point, you'll see a bounding box. And this bounding box gives you the ability to make adjustments to the width and to the height. And you can even rotate the object if you move your cursor outside of one of the corner resize handles. So that, of course, is a rectangle. You could really create any shape that you want. A circle or an ellipse, just come over and choose the ellipse tool and click and drag, and there's your ellipse. Again, if you hold down the Shift key, you'll constrain it to a circle. I'm going to go ahead and undo that for both of those objects, which is Command-Z on the Mac, it's Control-Z on Windows. So based upon looking at the rectangle tool and the ellipse tool, you can quickly see how you would go about creating some of the artwork that we're looking at here. For example, this musical note is a series of ellipses with some rectangles connecting those ellipses. So it doesn't take long to figure out how you can go about creating more sophisticated pieces of artwork by simply experimenting with some of these basic shape tools inside of Illustrator. Adobe Illustrator gives you several different ways to work with brushes inside the program. The most obvious way, of course, is to come over and choose the Paintbrush tool. With the Paintbrush tool inside the control panel, you can set things like the stroke color, the weight of the stroke, the variable width profile, and of course the brush definition. All of these options will play a role in the overall appearance of your brush stroke. Right now, my brush definition is set to charcoal. And the charcoal brush definition resembles that of traditional charcoal when drawing on paper. You can also increase the width so it's a little bit easier to see. I'll go ahead and bump it up to 6 points. And if you want to change the color, feel free to do so. But once you're happy with your settings, all you have to do is click and drag. If you're not using a mouse and you're using a graphics tablet, so much the better. It makes it more natural and a little bit easier to draw. Nevertheless, I'm just going to go ahead and click and drag, and you can see I have a brush stroke. But this isn't the only way to work with brushes inside of Illustrator. What if you have existing artwork with existing paths? Well, you can style those paths with different brush appearances. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to go ahead and press the V key on the keyboard. I'll select this path I just created, and I'll delete it by pressing the Delete key on the keyboard. Then I'm going to select this path here. And with this path selected, you can then come over to the Brushes panel. If you don't see the Brushes panel, you can always come up to the Window menu, and under the Window menu, you can choose Brushes. Nevertheless, the Brushes panel will give you all sorts of options for controlling the appearance of this path. Now, initially, the Brushes panel may look somewhat limited. However, you do have the ability to open up different brush sets. You can do that by coming up to the top right-hand corner, and here you can choose Open Brush Library, and you can see all the different libraries that are available to you inside of Illustrator. So in this case, I'll go ahead and do something like choose Vector Packs, and then I'll choose Grunge Brushes Vector Pack. This is going to open up a separate panel. You can then come over and click on one of these brushes, and you'll notice your path is updated. If I click away from it, you can see that this brush stroke has a much more natural appearance now. Likewise, the brush stroke you just applied also appears inside the Brushes panel. There's some more basic brushes up here towards the top. If you select the path, you can then come over and click on one of these brushes. They're somewhat generic. In this case, this is a 5-point oval. And if you move to the right, you'll notice you have a 7-point round. The one next to it is a 15-point round. And you can define your own brushes inside of Illustrator. In fact, that's something that you'll probably find yourself doing quite often. But nevertheless, you can open up all sorts of different brush libraries, and based upon those brush libraries, you'll have the ability to really change the appearance of these paths based upon the brushes that you choose. And don't forget, you're not limited by what you're looking at here inside the panel. You can control it further. For example, I can increase or decrease the weight of the stroke. Maybe this is a little bit too thick. Maybe you want to go way back to something like 0.25 points, giving you a much thinner appearance. And of course, you can always change the color. If I come over to the stroke color, I can select something completely different. So experiment with these brushes, because ultimately this gives you the ability to quickly and easily add interest to your artwork by making them appear more natural and more organic. In order for us to get comfortable with color, we need to take a look at some components within the interface that gives you the ability to apply color to objects within the program. And we have 3 different objects here, all of which have stroke attributes but no fills. So if we select this first flower here on the left-hand side, we immediately get information about this flower in a couple different places within the interface. The first place, of course, is down here towards the bottom of the Tools panel. We can see that we have a black stroke and no fill. This information is repeated up here towards the top in the Control panel. Again, we can see that we don't have a fill color and we have a stroke color applied to it. So how can you go about changing these attributes? Well, right now, at this point inside of the program, the stroke attribute has focus. And again, we can verify that in a variety of ways, but the easiest way to detect that is by looking at the swatches down here towards the bottom of the Tools panel, and you can see that the stroke swatch is in front of the fill swatch. What that means is if you come over to something like the Color panel and you select a different color from this spectrum, once you let go of the mouse, you'll notice that that color is now being applied to the flower. Not all that obvious by looking at the flower object itself, but if you take a look at the different swatches, you can certainly see that the color's been updated. And if we click away from the flower, it's a little bit easier to see that this is blue and this is black. So again, I'll come over here and select this. What if you want to change the fill color? Again, using this same technique, what you need to do is bring focus to the fill color, and you can do that simply by clicking on the fill swatch. You'll notice that it's brought forward. If you come over to the Color panel and you sample a color, you'll notice that that color is now being applied to the fill. You also have the ability to come over to the Control panel and access these menus. If you click, you'll notice you get the Swatches panel, essentially. Just like clicking within this spectrum, if you click on one of these swatches, you'll notice you're updating the color. So if we come over here and choose something like yellow, which is far more obvious, we can see that the stroke now is in fact yellow. If you don't like working with swatches and you prefer to mix colors, hold down the Shift key and click, and you'll notice you get a panel that gives you the ability to do just that. You get this spectrum, and then you get a variety of sliders. In this case, because we're working with a print document, we get cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. If we were working with a web document, we would get RGB values, red, green, and blue. You can also come over to these swatches here and double-click. When you double-click, you're going to launch the color picker. The default appearance of the color picker gives you the ability to essentially sample a color from this spectrum, and you can control the spectrum ramp over here on the right. So if I click and drag down, you'll notice we're getting reds, yellows, greens, blues, and back to reds and purple colors. So again, this gives you the ability to sample a color from this spectrum ramp. You also have the ability to mix colors based upon hue, saturation, and brightness, red, green, and blue, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, and of course, hex codes. If you prefer swatch colors, you can come over and click Color Swatches, and you'll notice you get a list of color swatches. I'll return back to color modes, and then I'll click OK. Once you click OK, that new color is applied, in this case, to the fill. So you have several options in terms of how you can go about selecting color. You can use the bottom of the Tools panel, you can use the Control panel, you can use the Color panel, you can use the Swatches panel. And there's actually a couple other places that you can select color from as well, which we'll review a little bit later on. But what if you don't want to use a color? What if you don't want to fill or you don't want to stroke? Again, there's several different ways that you can do that. You can come over to the Control panel and simply select None. You could come over to the Color panel and you could select None. Or you could come over to the Tools panel, and here you could select None for the swatch that currently has focus. If I click this, you'll notice that the fill is removed. I don't want to do that. I want to undo it, Command-Z or Control-Z on Windows. You also have the ability to swap colors, so if you want the fill color to be the stroke and the stroke to be the fill, you can click this little two-way arrow. You could also press the X key on the keyboard to do that as well. So you have a lot of different options in terms of how that works. Now the X key, however, just changes focus. If you want that to be applied to the selected object, you have to hold down the Shift key and press X. So it's a little bit different, the Shift X and simply the X. So that should give you a general understanding as to how you can apply color inside of Illustrator. The last thing that I'll leave you with, if you ever want to get back to the default color values, which is a white fill and a black stroke, you can simply press the D key on the keyboard and it will do just that. So over the next couple movies, we'll explore other ways that we can work with color inside of the program. Working with type inside of Illustrator is one of the program's great strengths. What I'd like to do in this video is introduce you to the type tool so you're comfortable with getting text into your document. Then we'll talk about some of the features that you can use to control the appearance of your type. But make no mistake, I could talk about text inside of Illustrator for hours on end. There's so much capability here. With that being said, let's look at some of the basics. What I'd like you to do is come over and choose the type tool. With the type tool, you have two options for getting type into your document. The first is simply clicking. This technique is called point type. The other option is to use something called area type. Now, to create a separate text object, what you need to do is press the Escape key on your keyboard or choose a different tool within the Tools panel. I'll go ahead and press Escape. After doing that, you can reselect the type tool by going over to the Tools panel and selecting it, or you can use the keyboard shortcut, which is simply T. Now, instead of clicking, what we're going to do is we're going to click and drag. When you click and drag, you define an area for your text to sit within. And this, of course, is called area type. So once you have your type within your document, how can you control its appearance? Well, you'll notice I have a blinking cursor here, and because I do, I could select the text and come up to the Control panel and choose a different font, a different size, and you'll also notice that there's an option to access the Paragraph panel. All of these options ultimately give you the ability to control the appearance of your typography. There's also a Character panel giving you additional options that you're not seeing here for formatting type. Typically what I do is press the Escape key and leave the text object selected. Then I'll come over and open up the Character panel, either by clicking this character link here in the Control panel, or by coming up to the Window menu. And under the Window menu, you have to come all the way down to the bottom and choose Type. Then you can choose Character from the submenu. This will open up a free-floating character panel. Notice you have quite a few options here. You can change the typeface, and if there's variations of that font, you can set that variation here. You can also control the size. You can control leading options. You also have the ability to work with kerning and tracking, which is the distance between characters. So in this case, if you want to use a different font, simply open up this menu, and you'll notice you get a preview over here on the right-hand side. And if there's different variations of that font, you can expand it, so you can see things like bold, condensed, regular, so on and so forth. There's also a little icon which indicates what type of font format it's in. whether it be OpenType, TrueType, or PostScript. So to choose a different font, simply select it from this menu. And if you do that, you'll notice that the text is updated. You also have the ability to browse all sorts of fonts on the Typekit website. If you're a member of the Creative Cloud, you have access to these fonts and you can sync them directly to Illustrator from the Typekit website. So selecting a font is fairly straightforward. In fact, it's so easy, if you know the name of the font, you can simply type it and it will drill down and filter out the font list, revealing the fonts that start with those characters. I'll go ahead and press Escape. Again, choosing any other property is simple. If you want to change the font size, or if you want to control the spacing between characters, or the distance between lines of text, all that's available to you here in the Characters panel. There's also options for paragraph formatting, justification, alignment. All of these options are available here within the Paragraph panel. And if you are working with an OpenType font, you'll get additional OpenType features that are available from the OpenType panel. So as you can see, there's no shortage of features and options for controlling typography inside of Adobe Illustrator. When it comes to scaling, rotating, and transforming your artwork, we know that we have all of these tools that we just looked at, along with the traditional bounding box that becomes visible when you select artwork. However, there's another tool that kind of combines much of this functionality, and it's called the Free Transform tool, which is located over here inside the Tools panel. Now, because the Free Transform tool exists, many designers don't like viewing the bounding box because the functionality that the bounding box provides is built into the Free Transform tool. So what we're going to do is come over to the View menu, and under the View menu, we're going to hide the bounding box. Once you hide the bounding box, of course, we are still currently showing edges, so we can tell that the artwork is selected, but we don't have any options in terms of resizing or rotating the artwork unless we come over and choose one of those specific tools or the Free Transform tool. Now, with the Free Transform tool selected, you'll notice you have all these options that become available. You'll notice you can constrain the artwork. You can use Free Transform. You can also use a Perspective Distort or a Free Distort. So we're going to use the Free Transform ability, which is the default behavior. And notice you can rotate the artwork if you place your cursor outside of one of the corners. If you click and drag, you'll do just that. I'll go ahead and undo that. You can also scale the artwork. If you click and drag and hold down the Shift key, you'll constrain the proportions. Now, unlike the bounding box, if you click and drag one of the handles in between the corners, you can't really constrain the proportions. You'll just adjust the width or the height independently of one another. So you can't constrain proportions like you can with the bounding box. Now, the other options, of course, is that you have the ability to come over here and select Perspective Distort. And once you do that, if you click and drag one of these handles, notice that you're changing the perspective of the artwork. You also have the ability to work with a Free Distort. So you could pick up one of these handles and completely alter the appearance of the artwork. And finally, up here towards the top, you have a Constrain, which means if you click and drag any one of these handles, you'll constrain the proportions. Now, it's a little difficult to see that when you have the Distort option selected. So I'm going to come over here and choose Free Transform. Now, if I click and drag, you'll notice that I am in fact maintaining proportions without holding down the Shift key. And that's the case for any one of these corner handles. But again, if you grab one of these middle handles, you do not maintain proportions. You will essentially increase just the width or just the height. So the Free Transform tool gives you many options for transforming your artwork. The last thing that I'll leave you with, if you decide that you want to change the scale of the artwork and you click and drag one of these corners, you will maintain the proportions, but the difference here is you're always working off of the top left-hand corner in terms of a reference point. But if you hold down the Option key or the Alt key on Windows, you'll dynamically change that to the center. So that option is available when working with the Free Transform tool. So there you have it. There's several different ways that you can modify the appearance of your artwork inside of Illustrator. Typically, The free transform tool will fit the bill for many situations. Saving your documents inside of Illustrator is as easy as coming up to the File menu and choosing Save. If it's the first time saving the document, the Save As dialog box will appear. By default, you'll be saving an Adobe Illustrator document. This is the native Illustrator file, so if you double-click it, it will certainly open up in Illustrator. It's a good idea to always have a native version of your artwork. But notice there's other formats. You could save it as an EPS file. Oftentimes, third parties or print shops will prefer an EPS file, and this is how you can save it as that format. Sometimes they prefer a PDF file, and you'll notice you have that option in the Format menu as well. Outside of that, you have some template options and some SVG options. Once you save the document, you may run into situations where you need to export the document. Let's say, for example, you were going to send this to print, but you also wanted a copy for your website. Well, you have a couple different options here. One option is to come up to the File menu and simply choose Export. From this dialog box, you'll notice you have a PNG option for the format. But notice all these other options. You could save it out as a JPEG or an SWF file, or even a native Photoshop file. So again, using the export command, you have even more options when it comes to the particular format. But as I was talking about the web, there is another option that's a viable solution, and that is the Save for Web command. What this will do is open up a new dialog box, giving you the ability to preview different types of compressions that you can apply to the image to ultimately squeeze it down to the smallest possible file size while maintaining a high quality visually. And again, I'll go ahead and cancel out of this dialog box. Inside of Illustrator CC, you also have the ability to package a file. If you come up to the File menu, you can choose Package. This will open up the Package dialog box, and here it can copy things like links in separate folders, fonts that are used in the document, and it can even generate a report. That way, you can give one file to the print shop, and all necessary files will be included within this package. The exception, of course, is if you're working with Typekit fonts or Chinese, Japanese, and Korean fonts. Again, I'll go ahead and cancel out of this. Finally, if you have a Behance account, you can easily share this artwork on Behance by coming up to the File menu, and from there, you can choose Share on Behance. So, as you can see, Adobe Illustrator gives you several options for not only saving your file, but getting your file into different formats and making it easy for third parties to work with those files.
Hello, my name is Paul Tranny, and I'm really excited to introduce you to Adobe Illustrator. There's so much you can do with it, everything from creating graphics to illustrations to logos like you see here. I want to go ahead and get started by creating this shape right here, but this is ultimately the logo I want to build, starting with this shape. So I'll close down that file and follow along as we go to File, New, create our very first Adobe Illustrator file. Let's give it a name, call it Logo. The size will be letter, and it will have a horizontal orientation. Okay, and what's nice about Illustrator is that it's vector-based, so the size really doesn't matter because you can scale items up and down very easily since they're vector-based. All right, from there, just click OK. And then you'll notice we have our document right here, and off to the side, we should have a toolbar, and again, it's broken up into sections. So you have your selection tools at the top, you have your creation tools right in here, you have your manipulation tools, and then some of your advanced tools down here. Well, I want to create that sort of sticker badge, if you will, so I'll start out with the rectangle tool with it selected. Notice how I get a fill and a stroke, and that's the fill and stroke that it will have once I draw the item out. And also up here, we have this option bar. Okay, so if I happen to draw a rectangle, I can manipulate it up here in your options bar, whether it's changing the color, maybe even changing it to a gradient, something like that. You can see it changes that gradient in there, and that basically the fill. I can change the stroke color and even the stroke width of the stroke as I change that up and down. Let's keep it about 4 point would be good. Alright, so I've manipulated the colors of this item that I've just drawn, and I can also manipulate the size and position. So I'm going to use the selection tool to do that. So with your selection tool selected, you'll get these different points that you can then manipulate. Maybe it's height, maybe it's position, maybe scale it from the corner, scaling it down kind of like that. And again, I can always position it into the center like that. Alright, so that's our first shape, and like you saw earlier, I want to create a shape that has kind of these points on the sides, on every side actually, and you can do that using the pen tool, maybe the pencil tool, but actually what's hidden behind some of these tools, the ones that have an arrow in the lower right corner, if you click and hold, it will expand out a menu full of additional items. So if you want to draw a circle, everything clear down to a star, well that's what I want to create here is a star. Somewhat of a star, so if I just click and drag, it gives me that 5-pointed star. Okay, but the one I want actually has something more like 8 points, so I'll click delete, and with my star tool still selected, I can click once, and now I can manipulate the number of points. So I can increase that up to about 8 points if I want, and the radius, the closer these two numbers are together, the more shallow the angles are. And I'll show you exactly what this looks like. Well, that says 87. Let's do like 63. Select OK, and now you can see that shape that I get. So that looks pretty good. Again, I can position it into place using the selection tool, scaling it down, holding the shift key, dropping it in right there, something kind of like that. Again, just getting that shape that you want. And that looks pretty good. I can take the same shape, and just like with other programs, I can copy and then paste it to make the other side just like that. Alright, I'm going to use the star tool again, click once, and now I'm going to make a sort of a star with about 12 points. Alright, that looks pretty good, and this one is going to go right here in the center. Alright, in fact, let's increase the size of this a little bit as well. Although this is only the beginning, I want you to congratulate yourself on creating your very first shapes in Illustrator. Continue with the other lessons as you learn how to combine and manipulate these shapes, as well as how to add text and even more high-quality graphics. In the previous lesson, we learned how to create these shapes, and I do like how they turned out. But really, I have 4 different shapes, and I want to take all these various paths, and again, I'll use the zoom tool to do this. I'll zoom in here, and I want to take all these different paths and join them together, make it one solid shape. Alright, and in order to do that, I can go to Window, down to, right down here, Pathfinder. And this is great because this allows me to, you can see, unite all these shapes together. I can subtract the front from the back. You can do intersect and exclude. There's a lot you can do in here. In this case, I want to unite all those shapes, selecting that, and now I've united all of those shapes. All right, that looks pretty good. I'm starting to notice maybe some issues, as you can see right over here. And you might get this. You might come in here and expect to use your selection tool when actually you can use your direct selection tool to then sort of select this line and select these different points and move them into position, create more of a point if you want to. There's a number of things you can do right in here, and if I zoom out a little bit, just Command minus, I can see what that looks like, or Control minus if you're on a PC. But from there I can select any one of these points and manipulate it. So I'll zoom out a little more and just kind of create a point that I like. Something kind of like that works. Again, I'll do that over here, the bottom, sort of making that point come out kind of like that. I'll scroll to the other side, doing the same thing, maybe pointing that out just like that. Again, it doesn't have to be exact, but it's nice that you have that sort of control. Hitting the space bar, you'll be able to pan around your document, which is nice. And then again, Command minus or plus, you can zoom in and out. and Control minus or plus if you're on a PC. So again, rolling over using the direct selection tool, I can start to manipulate these different points and really get something nice. This is what I want to go with. I'd say that looks pretty good. Maybe a couple more manipulation of these various points to get what I want, but it's nice that I have this full control when it comes to Illustrator. Lastly, all I need to do is go to File and save this document. I can save it to the desktop as a logo AI Illustrator file, clicking save, saving it as the latest version. Click OK and congratulate yourself on creating your first shape in Illustrator. There's a lot you can do when it comes to manipulating the color of items in Illustrator. In fact, here's my shape, and all I need to do is select it, and I can go up to my options bar and I can change my colors this way just by selecting any one of these colors, but I can also go beyond that by using my color panel. Now in this case, you can open up your color panel by going to Window, Color, and then it's just a matter of selecting that color you want. So that's for a solid color. Well, what if we want a gradient? Well, again, go to Window, down to Gradient right here, opening up that gradient panel, and then just selecting the type of gradient you want to work with. Alright, so this is the gradient I have so far, but I can go beyond that right over here. In my toolbar, I have this gradient tool. So selecting that gradient tool, look what I get. I get those same, they're called color stops. So this little color stop, I can manipulate it. Okay, and that's the equivalent of manipulating this right here. The same thing. So I encourage you to use the gradient tool. I can pull this off, just clicking and dragging and getting rid of that color stop. In fact, I can draw a line, say at an angle like that, and then I get that nice gradient there. And again, manipulating these color stops and maybe pulling them off where I need to. I like how that looks. Lastly, maybe I'll just double click on this one here. It's pretty yellow. I can make that a little more gold, and I love that transition I have there. And notice that you can also change it to radial. So that's how you can easily manipulate colors, either using your options bar or your gradient or color panels, and notice you can do the same thing with strokes as well. So lastly, all I'll do is save my document, and I can continue to work on this some more by adding some more shapes to it. Illustrator really is powerful, giving you the ability to create shapes from scratch, just like I've done here. And I made this by combining a rectangle and some stars together that I've manipulated. I can also use the pencil tool to create items from scratch. But really what you can do is you could take advantage of symbols that are already built into Illustrator, so you don't necessarily have to go to all of that work. I'm going to scroll down to Window, Symbols. I encourage you to do this with me. Window, Symbols, opening up that Symbols panel, you can see some various symbols right in here. In fact, if we select this flyout menu, you'll get options for that particular panel. In this case, I can open up a symbol library and look at all of these libraries that we have available. So I can jump in here and select, hey, select Regal Vector Pack. Opening up that panel, you can see it right here. In fact, I'll close this first panel because now I can take advantage of all of these various shapes. In this case, I want a banner, so I can drag out this banner just like that. I can create that banner that way, and I can even drag one out right over here, and now I have two banners. In fact, I can start to manipulate the size of each one of these. Selecting it, holding down the Shift key, expanding that out just like that. Expanding out this one as well. Alright, that looks pretty good. I like how this banner looks. There's this one as well, and I can expand that out a little more. But I'm noticing that I have this depth issue, and really I want this banner to be behind this badge sticker. So in order to do that, I can select this particular banner and go over here to my Layers panel. And if I twirl that arrow down, you'll see those different shapes. I get a color square showing me that that is what is selected. So all I need to do, just like in Photoshop for instance, I can drag that beneath that sticker shape, and now it puts it behind it. So in the layers panel, that's how you can control depth. All right, I'm going to do Command minus or Control minus if you're on a PC, just to zoom out, and I can start to add additional items. In this case, I'd like to potentially add, I like this particular shield. I can drag that out, expand that up. That looks pretty cool. Expanding that up just like that. Again, I have that depth issue. I can do the same thing over here in my layers panel. Just clicking and dragging that beneath everything else. All right, let's add 2 more shapes. Maybe a crown would be good. Dropping in a crown, just like that. Scaling it down. Putting it right there. I'd say that looks pretty good. And lastly, let's get some wings in there. In this case, I'll just grab these wings here. Again, that looks pretty cool. Adjust the size like that. And moving that beneath everything else, just like that. So that's how you can easily add additional shapes all through the Symbols panel, selecting what you want. I encourage you to explore all of these, but you can easily see how you can add various shapes that you didn't have to draw yourself, and obviously the results are clear. You can really add a lot to whatever you're trying to create in Illustrator. Now that I've added various symbols here to this design that I'm working on, I actually want to manipulate them. In fact, as I select this symbol, it happens to be a symbol, it tells me up here in my options bar, and since I want to edit it, I can click Edit Symbol. Notice how it says that anytime I edit a symbol, it will be applied to all instances. Keep in mind I have 2. I have 1, 2. So if I change it here, it's going to change it here as well. Click OK. And now as I take a look, I'm inside of that symbol, zooming in, but at this point I can use my direct selection tool to maybe add some sort of gradient inside here, just some sort of color. In fact, I'll just stick with that sort of bluish green color. I like that color. In fact, I can select this shape in here, and holding down my shift key I can select that shape in there as well, and then pick that same color, something like that. So I'm manipulating this particular item, again holding down my shift key, selecting those 2 triangles, and from there I can pick, like again, that color. In this case I want to go a little darker, so I might use my color panel to go a little darker, just so I have that nice depth being created like that. So that looks pretty good, and all I need to do at this point is click Edit Symbol Editing Mode, come back out, zoom out, again Command minus, holding down my space bar, adjusting the position of my document, and now you can see it's added those colors to this symbol. Okay, so that's the power of symbols. You edit it once and it changes everywhere. Very powerful what you can do. I love Illustrator because you have control over vector graphics, but you can also apply effects to any of these graphics in Illustrator. So for these wings, for instance, I can select them. It happens to be a symbol, but either way I can apply effects to it. So I encourage you to select Effect, and in here there's so much we can do as far as distorting them, various things, warping them. In this case I want to stylize these wings just by giving them a nice drop shadow. Okay, so I'm just going to create some depth by selecting drop shadow. You might not see anything initially because you need to check preview, and now you can see it's added that drop shadow, and I can start to manipulate that drop shadow. In fact, I want to take that down to about 5 or 4 points, something like that, and blur it out a little more because I like giving it a lot of blur, but still keeping it pretty subtle at about 75% opacity. So something like that looks pretty good. Click OK, and I can do the same to this particular shape here, going into stylize, drop shadow. I'd encourage you to play with some of these others, inner glow, outer glow. You could only imagine what those do, but in this case I'm just going to apply that same drop shadow. And what's cool is as soon as I've edited those settings, it keeps those settings for the next time I want to use them. But you can easily see how I'm able to create some nice depth for this particular design right there. In this case, I'll tone it down to about 5 point and apply that to both of these. Just like that. All right. That looks good. I encourage you to explore all of the various effects, whether they're Illustrator effects or even some Photoshop effects. There's so much you can do, but really just have fun manipulating various graphics in Illustrator. Illustrator not only gives you the ability to manipulate graphics, but you can also add and manipulate text. And that's what I want to do now. I'm going to add some text here in the center as well as on these banners. But you'll start to notice that there's a potential that I could actually select any one of these graphics and actually move it. So I encourage you to go over here to your layers panel, and for all of those layers, you can see right in there, I can lock those down. So now I can't accidentally move them. But what I can do is I can add another layer, and this will be where my text goes. Okay, so this is my text layer. From there, I can just zoom in a little bit and use the type tool to add some text. So clicking once, I can type in designer. And that's the text I want to add. With it selected, you'll notice up here in my options bar, I can change the size. Okay, so I can change the size of this text, positioning it accordingly. And really, I'm not a huge fan of this font. Myriad isn't bad, but I don't want it for this main text here. I think it should be fun, but of course I can change that to any text I want that you have on your operating system. Okay, in this case, I might want to use something like Lobster, and notice how I can just type in the name of the font right in here, selecting it just like that. And you can actually download Lobster for free from the internet, so I encourage you to do so. But from there, I can, start to size this text accordingly. So there's my fun text. It's the Lobster text. I've made it the right size. I can position it and manipulate it just like any other graphic, and I'd say that looks pretty good. But what about the text I want to put on these banners? Well, that gets a little more complex. So I'm just going to scroll up and over, and I'll type in my name. I encourage you to type in your name, but this is really my logo that I want to make. So selecting that text, in this case, I might want to use Myriad. So I can select Myriad just like that, Myriad Pro. Start to scale down that text and really get it to fit right in here. Okay. In fact, I'll even turn it white. Okay. So there's my text, but I want it to follow this path. So in order to do that with that text selected, I can come up here to my options bar, make envelope. Oh, this is interesting. Selecting that, see how I can change it, give it an arc lower. I encourage you to change the shape, picking the different styles. In this case, I want rise. That seems appropriate, this rise right here, because that seems to follow that banner. In fact, I can bend it some more if I want to as well. Bending it some more, something like that. Almost about 70%. Clicking OK. And I'd say that looks pretty good. Putting it into position, and notice with it still selected, I can always change its bend or distortion or whatever options you have based on the style that you've given it. So that looks pretty good. In fact, all I need to do now is copy and paste it for my other text right down here. So copying it, pasting it, double clicking, and just changing that text for higher. Something like that, typing in that text. Notice how it's inside of the envelope. So I did double click, so I just need to go back out and go back 1 level or 2 levels, and then positioning that into place, even using my arrow keys if I want to get that into the right position for both of these text items. But that's the easiest way to manipulate text in Illustrator, giving you what you want. And it's nice that this text is always still editable when it comes to manipulating its shape. So there's so much more you can do. I encourage you to check out the type tool as well as the many different options you have for text. Just click and hold down on that type tool and you'll have those various options.